Of course, the last few days we've heard that Newcastle and Spurs were among the first clubs looking for the government for financial help. They were heavily criticised. Then Liverpool were another latest club to join them. There's been a massive backlash against this on social media. I should make the point that Manchester City have today announced they will not be furloughing their non-playing staff. So here we have, Simon, a situation where 9 months after the Champions League final, the highest profile football match in the world every year, the two participants, Spurs and Liverpool, on the surface at least, appear not to have the money to pay their own staff, but requiring the state, who needs every penny it can at the moment for the NHS and the police, as you described just there, actually going to them to pay their way, having announced, by both clubs, huge profits in recent years. But you think that something, and this has been pussyfooted around by everybody else, but I think you think that something else is going on here.
Listen, I've had a couple of conversations with people within the confines of and chairman of Premier League football clubs and various thought processes of my own. Look, the idea that football is awash with money is a little bit of a misrep. The Premier League is awash with money, but 75% of that goes to the players and their salaries. The idea that the Premier League clubs really want to furlough, they don't want to furlough. Liverpool don't want to furlough. Tottenham don't want to furlough. Newcastle don't want to furlough. What they want to do, Danny, is they want to create leverage for the elephant in the room. The challenge involving football at this moment in time, where the alarm bell started to really ring, was about 3-4 weeks ago, when out of the football came the huge noises about clubs not being able to survive, clubs in League 2 not being able to survive, clubs in League 1 not being able to survive, Championship clubs. You've now got Premier League clubs like Burnley saying, if we don't get some money in by August, we're not going to have any money left. So my belief, and I think it's a relatively sound one, is that the ideal behind, if you're Tottenham Hotspur and you've got a wage bill of £160 million a year, that's £14 million a month. If you get your players to take a 30% pay cut, that's a £4.2 million saving that can either be helping you in the lost revenue you've got or being redistributed amongst the football family. If you furlough 200 of your staff at £2,000 a time, you're saving £400,000. The bigger game is about getting the players to take a pay cut. It's about creating leverage. It's about creating traction. It's about putting the players under pressure to do inevitably what they have to do, which is, in this particular moment in time, in this particular crisis, with broadcasters being challenged, with no gate receipts, with no revenue coming into football clubs. I did some analysis, Danny. The average Premier League football club, on its last accounts, had cash reserves of 24 million quid. Out of the 20 Premier League clubs last year, 7 or 8 of them made profit. The entire league as a whole lost 100 million quid. Right? So when you look at that and say the average Premier League club's got 24 million of cash reserves, the average wage bill in the Premier League is £9 million a month. So the average Premier League club has got 3 months worth of salaries to be able to survive. That's what it's got in its cash reserves if you look at their cash reserves on their last accounts. The argument behind that, which is, well, they've got billionaire owners. The billionaire owners should step in. Well, with the best respect in the world, look at the businesses that are out there. And I'm not making a case. I do not agree. If these players eventually come to the table, it takes 9 days to build a hospital at the Nightingale Hospital for 4,000 people. It seems to take 3-4 weeks to get 500, 600 members of a union in the Premier League to come to terms with the reality of what they should be doing for their industry, because their industry is the one that's challenged. And somehow this has all disappeared into the players are funding the NHS. No, it's the government's job to fund the NHS.
Yep, that's exactly
Matt
right.
Hancock getting involved by another broadcaster, a colleague of ours that we both like very much, Julia Hartley-Brewer, asking a question, and then Matt Hancock giving his answer, has teared off into Gary Neville having an opinion, Gary Lineker having an opinion, everybody jumping on the bandwagon. Premier League footballers should not be funding the NHS unless they want to make gifts to it. That's their choice. And by the way, I'm not quite sure where that money goes into the NHS, because the NHS isn't struggling to buy PPE, isn't struggling to buy kits, it's struggling with distribution. So my whole vantage point is the furlough, which is at the genesis of this question, is about creating leverage. It's about making the players and their union do what they have to do in this time.
Right, so let me get this right. So because I want the listeners who are listening to your voice, and it's a complicated. It's not that complicated, but it's an interlocked issue. So first of all, just a yes or no to this one. Of course, there's never a yes or no answer. So in your opinion, Tottenham, Liverpool, and Newcastle are doing this to try and put pressure on the players or the PFA or both to get to the real grist of football's problem, the size of the players' wages.
Danny, without a doubt, Tottenham don't need 400 grand in wage deferral or wage support from the government. They need to reduce the 12 or 13 million pounds a month they've got on a wage bill.
Are you seriously telling me then, Simon, that Spurs and Liverpool have been prepared to take the PR disaster?
I think they've got the courage of their convictions. I think people live in a world because everybody sees 2.9 billion going into Premier League football clubs. Everybody sees Premier League footballers driving Ferraris, Aston Martins, Lamborghinis, living the lifestyle that people could only dream of. They see billionaire owners investing in football clubs, and they think that the whole industry is a wash. Unfortunately, Danny, it is a wash with money. The problem is that the balance is wrong. If you've got 75% of every pound that comes into a football club going into a player's pocket, whether that's right or wrong, it's the economics of how the industry's been created. It's not helped when you get billionaires like Roman Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour that come in and say, right, we don't care about the rules of football. We're just going to spend and spend and spend and spend and spend. We're going to drive up the transfer fees. We're going to drive up the salaries so that the industry can't sustain itself. So when you come to disasters, which one hopes you never see, but we are seeing now, you've now got a scenario where these clubs in the public mind that are institutions full of dough aren't full of dough. They look like they are, but the only people that seem to be allowed to make any money out of football are players, agents and managers. And of course now, the billionaire owners of football clubs should step in. But with respect, Danny, not every single football club in the Premier League has got a billionaire owner. Tell Burnley about how they should fund their wage bill when they haven't got any income coming in. And the idea that football sits on its own, and I'm not saying that to some extent as a sport it shouldn't, when you've got Wetherspoons that have got 43,000 employees that made 110 million last year, putting their employees on furlough, when you've got British Airways, that part of the IAG group that made 2.9 billion and they're putting 30,000 on furloughs, and Primark that made 500 million last year putting 30,000 people on furlough. Why is the football industry being singled out?
Sure, none of this was what that scheme was designed for. None of those businesses you mentioned there.
But they are.
Let me ask you a question. Well, of course, because people will take advantage, and people think that that's what Daniel Levy and Fenway Group are doing, and Mike Ashley.
It's not.
Right. So let me ask you this, Simon. If the players, and we'll get on to whether the players should be taking a pay cut, because we'll talk about PFA next. If the players do find their wages being reduced temporarily or offset, or whatever the phrase that will come up will be used,
cut.
Do you think Tottenham and Liverpool and Newcastle will take their non-playing staff back onto their own wage bill?
If they do not, if these clubs then get a pay cut, which is what everyone's angling for, and they continue with the furlough, then there is something morally bankrupt there, because you can't have it both ways. You cannot get into the elephant in the room, which is player salaries, which is the thing that's causing everybody problems, and then turn around and say, well, we've got this pay cut, we've got the players, we've got them to accept the ideals that we've now want them to upset. Oh, by the way, we're going to take the government. And then I can find no justification for that.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make that clear, because this is all going to unfold in the next little while. As I say, when you've got the two Champions League participants, I couldn't believe when Spurs did it, and then you told me that you thought there was something else behind it, and now we're beginning to see what it is that you think is behind it. And of course, usually what you think is because... And people say, oh, don't be blowing smoke up Simon's bottom. Well, the difference is that Simon does get to speak to people high up in the game. Believe it or not, they still talk to him. And this is where we come to with this. Well, next up, we'll talk about... We've seen players making very good individual gestures, and Jordan Henderson, Danny Rose, others, forgive me if I've forgotten some of the names, have already done stuff. But with this business about their wages... And again, Simon's right to say there are a whole lot of other companies out there who've got some other issues with the thing, but we have to be a sports station, and we're talking about football. The PFA seem to be the ones who are saying to the players, hold on a second here, don't do anything about conferring with us, and we'll talk about that next, whether the PFA will eventually be a help or a hindrance? And if they are a hindrance, what does that say about them and greed running rampant in the game? All that's coming up in a few seconds' time here on The Final Word. I'm Danny Kelly. He's Simon Jordan. We're really glad to have you along for any part of this that you can take part in, or the whole of the ride.
Your local M&S food hall.